Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. I'm joined by Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle. The show, as many of you know, brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. And one of the big burning issues is the drug war, which, by the way, we're having a big conference on. It's on our website. Be sure to check it out. It's on Saturday, October 18th. This very well may be the best conference we've ever put on in our 25-year history. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's addressing stopping the wars on drugs and terrorism, both wars in one conference. And what we're going to do today, though, is talk, well, I guess about both wars, but primarily about the drug war, because the Washington Post on Sunday published an unbelievable expose of what's called asset forfeiture. This is the process by which the cops, both on the federal level and the state and local level, stop cars on the highway in what's really can only be described as highway robbery. And they find people with cash, and they just steal the cash from them. They just take it from them. They don't even charge them with a crime. They just say that cash has got to be involved in illegal dealings, because who else would be carrying cash except a criminal? They don't charge them with a crime. They just take the money and become self-funding fiefdoms. They're on the local level. They've got a revenue sharing agreement between the feds and the state and local cops, where they share the money with each other. And it's turned out to be, according to the Washington Post expose, one great big racket. Now, Sheldon, libertarians have been addressing this for many, many years, ever since this asset forfeiture law came into play. But boy, ever since 9/11, they've pulled on the war on terrorism and all the fears that people have that the terrorists are coming to get them. And they've combined all that now with the war on drugs, where the drug dealers and the terrorists are going to join forces and come and get us. And this thing has turned out to be one of the biggest rackets, probably in U.S. history. A racket in which the feds and the state and local governments are just stealing directly from the American people. What do you think?
Yeah, it smells like totalitarianism. There have been exposés before. This has certainly gotten attention from libertarians and from civil libertarians like the ACLU and Nat Hentoff. So it's not gone ignored. But what this Post series does is show how accelerated it's become after 9/11, because it's been linked now to terrorism. So I guess they can argue that drug money funds terrorist organizations. The Post has been paying attention to this whole complex for some period of time. They've done good series on the surveillance state and how the state has gotten the federal government has gotten heavily into this, and how whole branches of industry do nothing now but try to sell goods and services to the national government to facilitate surveillance. So this adds to that there are now private companies that maintain databases and other sort of services that make it easier for government to send tips and hunches to other law enforcement agencies. And it all begins with some innocent-looking traffic stop, which then can lead to a search for money in the car, and then, like you say, confiscation of it, even when they have no evidence whatsoever of any crime, even of a victimless, even of a violation of a victimless crime law, like they may not even find any drugs. According to the article, the telltale signs of a problem are if you have an air freshener hanging from your window or some trash on the floor, or if you sweat a little bit when you're stopped for, improperly signaling a lane change or failing to signal a lane change, or maybe your carotid artery is a little bit bulging a little bit. Those are all telltale signs police are told to watch out for. It means you're nervous. You have something to hide from the government. This is outrageous. I mean, people should be really disturbed and be screaming bloody murder at the politicians for letting this happen.
Yeah, you almost get the impression that they've put the finding of drugs and terrorists down to a secondary level. And from this article, it seems like all they're interested now in is finding cash. And what was fascinating about this expose, and it's actually a 3-part series. Part 2 came out today. We're linking to both parts in our FFF Daily today. And part 3, I assume, will come out tomorrow. But what's fascinating is how you've got these private agencies that are coordinating between government agencies and establishing this huge database where they can instantly share information on cars that they see traveling down the highway so that they can pass the information from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if one guy doesn't find anything, but he suspects that there's cash in there, he sends a notice down to the next guy, and maybe that guy will find it. And they share information on likely hiding places in vehicles. And I mean, it's become this huge racket where the focus is, how do we find the cash rather than how do we find the drugs and the terrorists? And I even noticed that they're having this conference where they're going to have they celebrate, they honor the police who confiscate the most money. And the big winner is called the Royal Knight. And so they give him some kind of award for having confiscated the most money. I mean, this is just highway robbery and racketeering in its purest form. And this is what we've been saying, Sheldon. I mean, if you look at the drug war that's been going on for decades now, it obviously is a failure in terms of what they purportedly want to accomplish, a drug-free society. I mean, everybody that wants drugs is able to get them. And you have all this collateral damage, the robberies, the murders, the gang wars, 60,000 dead people in Mexico alone, the corruption. So they really have no argument left to justify the drug war. But as we've been saying, and on this show we've been saying, really what's driving this drug war is big money. There's people that are dependent on the drug war. That's the only reason why they're keeping it going on, because there can't be any other reason. And they all acknowledge that the thing's a failure. But you've got bribes. You've got salaries, just regular salaries of federal judges, state judges, prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, clerks, bureaucracies. But here you got this one. Asset forfeiture. This is one of the main driving forces, in my opinion, for why cops and prosecutors and federal officials do not want to end the drug war. They are making big money on it legally and legitimately.
Right. Yeah, we have said this over and over again. The money, not the so-called corrupt money, but the legal money, is a big source of support. This filters through the whole society. You have the whole rehab industry, which would not want to give up the war on drugs because of the war on drugs, judges compel people to go to the rehab places for services. So they have this almost guaranteed income that's being sent their way by judges, which they lose if the drug war were to disappear. Like I say, if people fully understood the civil forfeiture, and I stress the civil, it's a civil matter, not criminal. So there's no burden of proof on the part of the state and no duty of it to charge people and present evidence against them, which then can be rebutted by a defendant. They just grab the money on the pretext that it was either the fruit of a crime or it's going to be used to commit a crime, somehow involved in crime. And the burden now is on you, the dispossessed owner, to go into court and prove that the money's clean. They used to take houses and boats, and there's been some horror stories about how they've specifically targeted properties that they wanted because they knew they would bring a lot of cash. And so this is just, it's hard to call this an abuse of police authority because it's just too intrinsic. I mean, it seems to me this is what police do. They've just been given greater and greater tools, and the war on terror, as Bush called it, a crazy term for something, it just made people more and more open to it because they're so afraid, they've been made so afraid, they're willing to put up with anything if the government just keeps them safe. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this given what's going on in Syria and Iraq with Obama, gearing up a full-scale effort. We're now up to 1,500 troops. It began as a couple of hundred. Now it's 1,500, not counting all the special ops that they don't tell us about. And they're trying to scare us that ISIS is here, it's on the way. There's a lot of Americans part of ISIS who have passports will easily come here, as if you need to travel anywhere to learn how to blow something up. You can look at your internet and do that. You don't need to go to risk your life in Iraq or Syria to learn how to do stuff like that. But they're going to use this and demand more and more tools about taking passports, and part of this will be stepping up of forfeiture because they'll figure somebody carrying money, okay, maybe it's not for drugs. Maybe you're going to give it to a terrorist organization. You can just see how this all mounts, how foreign policy and domestic policy converge. And as, Chalmers Johnson liked to say, the empire eventually comes home. So you better get rid of it now. But it's already here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought out the procedure because it really is horrendous the way they've got this thing set up. Here's how it works for people that are not really familiar with the details. They stop a car like for a speeding violation or any ridiculous thing, defective tail light or whatever, and they write the ticket. What they inevitably do is they start looking inside the car and for telltale signs that there might be some money here. And so then they start questioning the driver. You got any cash on you? And a lot of people feel intimidated. They feel like they're supposed to tell the truth to the cops, and they admit it. And now the cop, figuratively speaking, gets a great big smile on his face. I mean, he could be the Royal Knight, the guy that wins the prize for the confiscating the most cash. He seizes the cash, and without even charging the driver with any kind of criminal offense like drug dealing or whatever, I mean, on top of the speeding ticket or whatever, he can take the cash without charging the guy with terrorism or drug dealing. And then it becomes incumbent on the driver or the owner of the money to file a lawsuit for the return of his money. Now, as a practical matter, we all know what that means. It means go out and hiring a lawyer that is normally charging maybe $200 an hour or takes the case on a contingency fee like 30%. So the guy that's got a $20,000 money at stake, he's going to lose $6,000 right there on a contingency fee, all because the cops are just taking his money arbitrarily. And then he has the burden of proof. The owner has the burden of proving, as Sheldon said, that the money is clean. So the state doesn't have any kind of burden of proof. Like in a criminal case, they got to prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Here, the owner of the money's got the burden of proof to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the money is clean. Not surprisingly, many people just say keep the money, which, of course, the feds and the state and local cops love because then they've got the money and they don't have to go through any hassle, fighting lawyers in court and so forth. It's about as pure racket and racketeering and highway robbery as you could ever find. And Sheldon, I'm glad you brought up the terrorism aspect because we all know after 9/11, most Americans, their knees were quivering and quaking. They were shaking in their boots, just the same way that they're now doing with ISIS. Oh, ISIS is coming to get me. I just had an email from a guy this morning, a guy that says, oh, he's scared to death of ISIS. This is a different kind of danger. And that's what we saw after 9/11. You and I both remember it. Everybody was just scared to death. And so they got away with all kinds of stuff. The Patriot Act, the NSA surveillance, they expanded. The FISA court became more secret. I mean, it was like carte blanche for people that love statism and big government. And clearly, this is what they were doing with asset forfeiture. The cops, the DEA, they said, here's our chance. We can go out and seize as much money as we want from people, and there's not going to be any objection to this because we can bring up terrorism, we can bring up the drug war. And the fact is the Washington Post is pointing out a lot of the people, I don't know what the statistics are, maybe they cite them in there, that are totally innocent. I mean, they're carrying their money because they're buying a car somewhere and they want to deal with cash, or they're opening up a business somewhere and they don't want to deal through banks. And they're entirely innocent. And even the cops acknowledge that. And nonetheless, the people are made to go out and hire a lawyer and fight for this. And I'm not suggesting, Sheldon, that we reform this law. I'm saying that we get to the root of it. Legalize drugs entirely. They've had 40, 50 years to fight their war on drugs. They have failed. And they've just made life miserable for us. It's time to pull this weed out by its root, or to mix metaphors, to excise the cancer by excising the entire tumor. And I'd say the same thing for the war on terrorism and all this foreign interventionism that you and I have been talking and writing about for so long.
Well, it's only failed if the objective, you can't tell what's failure and success unless you know what the objective is. It's only failed if the objective was to make, the United States a drug-free zone. But I don't believe anybody thought that was any realistic. I don't think the most fervent drug warrior thought you could do that. I think the actual objective is to, it's been the health of the state, to pump up the power of the state. And in that sense, it's been a fantastic success. Like you say, they have a pretext to seize cash from us, as well as homes and cars and other things. They don't need any evidence. They can throw the burden of proof back on you when they take your stuff. That's a huge success if your objective is to grow the state, increase the power of the state. So I think we should not call the war on drugs a failure. I think from their point of view, it's been a rousing success. It's also been very lucrative, as you point out. I think we too easily take the government's statement of objectives at face value. They say the purpose is to, clean up America, keep kids from getting on drugs. That can't be it, because they would have learned a long time ago that that's really the objective. That's, the way they're trying to accomplish it is a loser. But it does make perfect sense. I mean, they're not insane, these people. They're perfectly rational. They're doing what very successfully will increase their wealth and power and their subjugation of the American people, and make the American people scared to the point where they'll put up with anything that the politicians say is necessary to protect them. And so it's been a rousing success. Of course they're giving each other rewards and drinking toasts. They're doing fine.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a money-making process, and there's two groups of people that are making the money off this thing. One are the drug lords, the drug dealers, and so forth. I mean, this is big money for them. We all know that. This is what lures regular people into the drug trade. That, boy, you can score big with just one transaction. You can make a lot of money. So you got a lot of young people that are sucked into this thing. They're not doing too well in the private sector, and they thought, hey, man, I can make one score and do really well. So you've got the drug dealing business that's making big money, which of course would be put out of business with drug legalization. In fact, I find it ironic that, they always trumpet these prosecutions of drug dealers and drug lords and, another big drug bust and all this. And it's an endless supply, because when they bust one, they get 10 more. But all of those people would be put out of business immediately with drug legalization. We would accomplish what they say they want to accomplish with all their criminal prosecutions. But the other group of people that is making big money off this thing are the cops, the judges, the clerks, the law enforcement people, the people at the border that are getting bribes. I mean, this is a big money-making operation. And anybody that takes the time to read this series in the Washington Post, and I'd highly recommend it. I mean, it's a real eye-opener as to what the real extent of this racket is. That the fact is that drug legalization would put all these people out of business, all the asset forfeiture gone. The judges would be sitting there twiddling their thumbs. I mean, a lot of them would just have to resign. These federal judges that have lifetime appointments, there'd be nothing for them to do. I mean, they could just sit there and twiddle their thumbs. Prosecutors, the same thing. U.S. attorneys that spend so much time, especially in the South and Southwest along the border with drug cases, out of business. And I think that's what's really one of the fascinating things about our philosophy, is that we want to pull the problem out by its root, this weed out by the root, which eliminates the money machine. And I think you're right. This is about money, that they've got to know by now that this thing ain't ever going to work. If you haven't made it work by now, it's not going to work. And you raise the foreign policy, ISIS, war on terrorism. It's no different there. And we talked about this right after 9/11, when everybody was quivering and shaking and deferring to George W. Bush, go to invade Iraq, invade Afghanistan, to heck with the consequences. We were over there saying, look, the 9/11 attacks, the anger and the rage was rooted in U.S. foreign policy. And so same thing. If you pull that weed out by its root, you bring the troops home, you dismantle the empire, you discharge the troops, all of a sudden no more terrorism, legalized drugs, no more asset forfeiture, no more drug gangs and fights and so forth. It's really the only way to go, Sheldon, because it's the only thing that works.
It's exactly why they won't do it. They don't want to lose. I mean, the people that run the system don't want to lose all of that. What are they going to substitute it for? Rabid raccoons? Give us more power because there's too many rabid raccoons out there. We got to have a big raccoon eradication program. That's not going to be scary enough. You got to have drugs, which means, your kid walking by an alley is going to get, some kind of a ghost is going to jump out of the alley called addiction and grab their kid and enslave the kid for life. and this is the way they sell the idea that drugs are so dangerous that it doesn't take sort of an act by the drug user to start the whole process and to continue the process. So they got to put the fear in people about drugs as if it's some sort of just contagious disease that's in the air. And then if that's not enough, you got to scare them about terrorism. Now, it's true. A terrible thing happened on 9/11, and there have been other incidents where totally innocent people have been killed. So, they haven't made that up, but they won't tell people. They don't like when other people say that it's the result of U.S. foreign policy. It's the result of brutality in the Middle East, supporting brutal regimes, corrupt regimes, or the U.S. directly brutalizing people in the Middle East, like the occupation of Iraq, the embargo in the 90s, and all that other stuff that causes people to want to come over here and get revenge. So they need all that. I don't think the problem is they can't get it through their thick heads. I think they well understand it. And it's been a great, not only a gravy train, but a great route to amazing power that maybe they thought they never would exercise here. But they're doing it. And the idea that they're going to give it up, I think is they're not going to give it up on their own. The question is, will the American people ever learn and demand an end to it? That's a much tougher hill to climb. And, of course, that's what we try to do every day.
Yeah, that's the big question is because you're right. I mean, government attracts the kind of people that want to live off confiscated loot, money that's been stolen from people. That's the kind of person that government normally attracts, person that wants that kind of power, wants power over people's lives. And so you can't really expect the change to come with inside the government. You're right. They're not going to say, oh, we've been enlightened by the Future of Freedom Foundation. We're doing this for the money. We're doing this for the power. And we've decided to relinquish this. I mean, that's like going into a bar and thinking you're going to convince people to stop being alcoholics or whatever. It's not going to happen. The real solution to this lies with the American people. I mean, that's why our work here at FFF sort of has our back to Washington and our front to the American people. Because that's where the ultimate solution is, where people start to see that this is a racket, both on the drug war and the war on terrorism. In the war on terrorism, their policies produce the very enemies that then they say that we have to protect you from. I mean, if you look at the whole history of U.S. interventionism in Iraq, it has a direct line leading all the way to ISIS. In fact, I just read an article about how ISIS is composed largely of military officials from the Saddam Hussein era. And if you'll recall, Saddam Hussein was once our partner, and then later they turned on him. And they invade Iraq, and it's all just the natural consequences of interventionism. And then you've seen the same thing in the drug war. You've seen the adverse consequences of this thing. But it's up to the American people, as you say, to see through this, to conquer their fear, and not sit there and say, oh, the drug dealers are going to come and get me, or my kids are going to get on drugs if I legalize drugs, or ISIS is going to come and get me if I dismantle the empire. They've got to get to where we libertarians are, where we see through it, we see it's a racket, and we say the only thing to do here is to, dismantle the racket, legalize drugs, end the drug war, and dismantle the war on terrorism, dismantle the empire.
Well, and we have to get them to listen. People are busy, with their micro lives. They're trying to make a living, trying to raise their family, get their kids to school, pay for school. They're busy, so they're not like us, spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, reading articles on the internet or watching the news talk shows to see what people are saying. The narrative is controlled by the politicians and the servile media. The servile media, which doesn't want to lose its access to the politicians. So it's just reinforced. It's a big echo chamber. I love the big conversation these days about Meet the Press, because Meet the Press isn't doing well, and they've just fired David Gregory. They brought on Chuck Todd, and the whole argument is this kind of program broken? Do they need to rethink things? And the defenders, including the new host, said, oh, no, it's not broken. It's fine. Except it's the same people every week, week in and week out, the same politicians and the same journalists given the same old tired, worn-out analyses and propose solutions, which is more government power. I mean, of course people stop watching these shows. These shows were never for the regular people anyway. It's for the governing class, the policy elite in Washington. And you know, you just need to watch those shows to see what a worn-out program this whole thing is. They have never anything new to say. They never bring on a guest to say, you know what, the whole framework is mistaken. Government power is the problem here, not the problem that they think they're solving. They're just making things worse. You never have anybody come on and say that. That's not an accident. That's not an accident. They know about libertarian solutions. They know what's being said out there on alternative media and the FFF website and similar websites. They're aware of all that, but they don't want to give coverage to it because it's too, you know, it jeopardizes the whole game. That's also part of the racket. And you know, they're not going to bring on someone who gives a really critical, radical criticism because that will make politicians mad and they might lose their access. They don't want that to happen. So, you know, I don't know how we beat this. We have to keep punching away like we do, but it's not easy and it takes a lot of time.
No, but there's a lot of people achieving the breakthrough, the same breakthrough that you and I achieved. I mean, I remember when I was buying into all this stuff, I was in my early 20s. I believed in it all, and I achieved a breakthrough. I realized that the racket of it all. I mean, look at all the crises we have. We got immigration crisis. We got drug war crisis, foreign policy crisis, terrorism crisis. And what they want you to do on these shows is to talk in terms of operating within this entire paradigm that is the cause of the crises. I mean, that's what's so ludicrous. I mean, like you take the immigration crisis. The crisis is a direct consequence of immigration controls. But they want you to go in there and argue on how to fix the immigration controls. They don't want you to present the case as to why there shouldn't be any controls at all. But that's the solution to no more crises. And the same applies to education, where you've got the state running the educational system. You've got the postal service, where the government's running that. And the war on terrorism, the drug war. And let me say one more thing about this drug war before we wrap up here. It's a racist government program. I mean, you know, people think that just because they ended segregation or ended the Civil War, that somehow or another, you know, the government programs in which that racism is demonstrated disappeared. Nonsense. You had Jim Crow, of course, but this drug war to me is the modern day manifestation of the racism in American society. You couldn't find a better example of a place where government officials could use their racial bigotry. And when they stop these cars on the highway, there is no doubt in my mind that they're looking for blacks and they're looking for Hispanics as easy bait, as easy pickings, because they know that those people, being by and large poorer, especially if they're operating a later model car, that it's more difficult for them to fight for their money back, go hire a lawyer, go through the system, and that this is the perfect opportunity for them to say, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with race. The fact that we're, you know, stopping people on the side of the road and asking for ID and harassing them and abusing them. The best way, Sheldon, to stop this racism is don't reform these asset forfeiture laws, end the war on drugs, and stop giving them the excuse to stop blacks and Hispanics in the first place.
I agree. I don't know what else to say. We do know that there are lots of indications that all of these laws take a much greater toll on members of minorities. This was discussed in the Washington Post series. Asians also get hit, and you know, it's unlikely that you know, a white guy in even in a nice car is going to get stopped because the cop probably figures this is going to be more trouble than it's worth. Go after someone who's much more vulnerable, who's got a lot less power, and so it's the expected thing. And as you say, who's going to be attracted to such jobs in the first place? Probably not people who are great believers in individual liberty.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind that we're having our big conference in October in New York City on these themes. This is what we're going to be talking about. And one of our best speakers is Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, which is a fantastic organization. Just Google their website and go to it, and you'll see that they've just done fantastic work in getting to the real root of the problems in this country, and one of the big roots is the drug war itself. In any event, that's the Libertarian Angle for this week. Nice talking to y'all, and I'm Jacob Hornberger with Sheldon Richmond, and we'll see you next time.